If you are intentional about your growth over time, that compounds. And this is what I see in great leaders. You never stop learning, because the minute you stop learning, you stop leading.
This is the Aesthetics Growth Podcast.
I'm excited to let our audience know that today on the Aesthetics Growth Podcast, I'm delighted to be joined by William Attaway, a friend, somebody I've had the pleasure of getting to know the last number of years. William is an executive coach, leadership strategist, and founder of Catalytic Leadership. With over 30 years of experience in leadership, William has really established a community and helped thousands of business owners through his reach, business owners and entrepreneurs to unlock really transformational growth through his programs, his leadership, his books, and through intentional leadership that we'll learn about today. William is the author of the book Catalytic Leadership. He also hosts a Top 2% podcast that I've had the pleasure of being on myself. And he's a true force for helping leaders, for business owners, our audience, to scale their business, to build elite teams, and become the kind of leaders who really make a difference. William, super excited to have you here. Welcome to the podcast.
Bref, it's such an honor to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, for those who may not know you as well as I do now, I'd love to hear, a quick introduction as to a little bit about who you are, and our audience will really appreciate understanding your evolution of leadership and through leadership in your life.
It's an interesting journey, and one that I would not have predicted. Starting in corporate, learning how to lead people, lead teams, moving into the nonprofit world, and all throughout working my own private practice and encouraging leaders of all stripes in three main areas. I work in leadership, in mindset, and in productivity. My goal is to help leaders get out of their own way. Help business owners understand that they don't have to be at the center of the spider web where everything connects to them, where every decision has to come to them. There's a better way. You started a business because you wanted freedom. You wanted location freedom, time freedom, and financial freedom. And there's a way to get there. It's just going to be on the other side of change. And that's where I help.
Awesome. Now we're going to dig into that because there's a lot to unpack there. And I know for our audience, for clinician, for med spa owners, they've trained, they've been through, medical schools. There's a lot of education there. And then it comes a time where they take that leap and they're starting a business, and all of a sudden you can't do it all by yourself. So you're leading a team. And we'd love to understand from you, our clientele, the audience, they maybe never got a formal education in leadership like a lot of us don't. Yeah. What is intentional leadership?
I believe it has to do with understanding that leadership is its own skill set. You go to school, you're trained in a particular discipline, and experience adds to that over time. But just because you're good at providing a product or a service or serving your clients in some way does not mean that leadership is among your skills yet. As you find success, as these owners have found success, they've had to hire people to help them with fulfillment so they can serve their clients better. At some point, those people look at them as the leader and say, okay, I'm ready, lead me. Well, leadership's a different skill, and that's not one that any of us are born knowing how to do well. You can try to stumble and fumble and find your way through, and that's what most do. But I believe there's a way to go farther than you can on your own, and that there's a way to get there faster. And that's through coaching. I've had coaches for decades who help me to see things in my own business that I can't see. We all have blind spots. Research shows that the average leader has 3.4 blind spots. And the interesting thing about a blind spot is you don't know you have it, but people on the outside can see it. That's why it's so valuable to have somebody who can ask you questions that maybe nobody in your world is going to ask you, because it's very, very difficult to see the whole picture when you're in the frame. So for business owners who are struggling and saying, hey, is there a better way to do this? The answer is yes, but it requires being intentional, meaning you have to move to the proactive side of leadership. Instead of just responding and reacting to the circumstances, to the challenges and problems with team members and with clients, you have to move to the proactive side and say, I'm going to pre-decide to be intentional about growth, about prioritization, and about execution.
I love that. We speak to a lot of our audience as well who you kind of get caught up in that machine essentially, and all of a sudden you're in it, you're driving in a direction, but having that plan, having that strategy, as you mentioned there, it's kind of like you're driving your business, you're driving a vehicle, there's certain blind spots. Would love to hear from you a little bit about maybe some examples perhaps of situations where you've helped those businesses to overcome an obstacle or to scale or to kind of see those blind spots so that they can elevate and drive forward and be more intentional in the leadership of their team and growing their business.
Sure. One I think that's pretty common is under communication. This is a blind spot that a lot of people have that they're just not aware of. They say it once or twice, or they write it in a policy somewhere, and they think that's it. I've communicated. And that's cute, but it's not realistic. The reality is, as business owners, we have to over communicate with our teams. The average person has to hear something 7 times before they actually hear it. That's difficult for us because as leaders, as business owners, we are constantly in motion. We're ready for the next thing. We're ready to climb the next mountain, but we can't leave people behind. As the old adage goes, a leader with no one following, that's just somebody taking a walk. So what you have to do is make sure you're bringing them with you. And the way that leaders do that is through communication. We have to over communicate. I've worked with clients on this recently. Had a client who was struggling with high team churn. And this was something he couldn't seem to hold on to team members. And as we began to unpack and explore this, I realized that under communication was a big element there. So we said, let's dial this in. I want to over communicate when it comes to expectations and particularly around what a win is. I want you to dial in exactly what it means for this person to win in this role. What's the center of the bullseye for this role? Build the KPIs around that and then evaluate. And so as he began to do that, what he found was that there was a lack of clarity on the part of team members as to what a win was. They thought they were winning, but not according to the metrics he was using. When he clarified that and over communicated, what he found was that now everybody's on the same page. Team churn went down, client results went up, and all of that is reflected on the bottom line.
We've seen examples of that within our own company. And I know that a lot of our audience listening that'll probably resonate with them because especially within healthcare, within, most industries, churn, getting the right people, keeping the right people. And I love what you said there as far as the under communication or over communication. It's not like there really isn't much an example of over communication because it needs to be done repetitively and reinforced. And are there any practical tools or things that you would recommend anybody who's listening that if they could do just 1 or 2 things to help with that, to communicate more effectively with their teams, what that might be?
2 things come to mind, Bref. The first one is this. When you're talking with your team members, ask questions. Ask questions to gauge their understanding and comprehension of the goals that you're trying to accomplish. As a team, as a business, as a practice, what does it look like for you to win? See if they can answer those questions. Come at it from 5 different directions with the questions that you ask. Questions will take you way farther than statements will. Leverage questions to gauge understanding and acceptance. People will not accept goals until they understand them. So the questions that you ask are going to help you to gauge that. And that's going to help you know how much more communication needs to happen. How much more do I need to ramp this up or amp it up in order to really break through? The second thing I would say is that when you are tired of talking about something, when you feel like you have communicated it to death and you are just sick of it, that's probably about the time that somebody's getting it the first time. That's tough. And as leaders, we don't like to repeat ourselves. We do not like to say the same things again and again. And yet that is exactly what is required in order to build this into the culture of your practice or your business.
That's potent. Thinking, about what you just said there as well with the communication, with celebrating the wins, and as a business owner where we have multiple different things going on as well, our sense of time can be a little bit different from our employees, perhaps.
Yeah.
So I think what's really important as well, and we spoke about this in the past as well, is the communication, celebrating wins, and defining wins is going to look a little different depending on the business, but also the core values of that company, right?
That's right.
And I'd love to hear a little bit more about your experience and helping your clients and your audience with developing those types of just framework or direction so that through intentional leadership and the intentional communication of things like core values, how important that is. Some of those fundamentals that I know a lot of businesses either speed ahead on or retrospectively have to figure out, oh yeah, I guess we need core values. I guess we need to have a mission and a vision and communicate that to our team. I know that was a lot, but would love to see if we can maybe package that for our audience so that you can help to communicate how important that is, or maybe examples of how you've helped to use that for businesses to help their team scale.
It's a great question. So often this is one of those nice add-ons that we think we can do later. You start a business, you start a practice, you're like, yeah, I'll get to that. The core values and mission and vision and all that. What those things do, the purpose and value of those things, is to help to direct and align all of the activity that you're engaged in. As a business owner, there are so many demands on your time. As somebody who's trying to run a successful practice, a growing practice, there's so many demands on your time. And if you allow it, you can stay in that reactionary mode forever. You can stay there until you finally give up and retire or die, right? That is a way to run a business. What mission and vision and values does is it helps you to align not just you, but everybody on the team and make sure that everybody is rowing in the same direction. And that's something you can then use as an evaluative tool to say, hey, how are we doing on this? Are we doing what it is we say is important to us? Are we moving toward the mission and the vision that we've defined as our goal, our wins? Or are we just busy? Everybody's busy. Busy. I said it earlier, right? How you doing? I'm busy. I got a lot going on. But are we busy doing the right things? Mission, vision, and values helps to define exactly what the right things are. Those are the lenses that you look at activity through to see if that activity is the best use of your time right now. There are many great ideas, but that doesn't mean that they're all great ideas for now. Mission, vision, and values are the lenses that help you make that decision. Working with a client not long ago, and she was really struggling with this. So busy, so many things to do, never caught up, never getting things done. And all of a sudden her days off became her days on. And there were really no days off, and just kept going because you got to keep building. You got to keep growing. You got to keep scaling. You got to keep serving clients. You got to keep building the practice. This is great. The problem is once you're on that treadmill, it is very difficult to see any other way. What mission, vision, and values did as we began to work through this was to define what is it exactly that you want to build. You get to decide. You're the entrepreneur. You get to decide what you want to build. You get to decide the life you want to live in. We get to choose. Don't give that agency away. Decide intentionally, purposefully. Once you've decided it, designed, now you see it. Now you can invite other people to be a part of that. For me, it's important that a healthy and sustainable pace are a piece of this. Because if we're not running at a healthy and sustainable pace, not just us, but our team as well, then burnout is going to be a constant companion. I don't want that for me. I don't want that for my team. So that's one of the things we talk about a lot. We want to serve clients to the best of our ability with excellence, but we want to do so at a healthy and sustainable pace. That's a choice because that's a value.
Well, yeah, lot to unpack there. I know for a lot, especially in the scaling mode for businesses, right? And I was just reading an article about this the other day as well, just with that burnout, and that over 50% of startups burning out within those first couple of years, and certainly in this fast paced environment that we live in. How do businesses prevent that? Like, what sort of either tools or strategies can a lot of our audience, for example, are either scaling towards their first $1 million per year, or from 5 million to 10 million, or looking to be, going to 8 figures to be bought up by private equity. And there's kind of that race and there's so much going on. What would you say to them when it comes to avoiding some of those pitfalls or those burnouts? What kind of tools can they use to stand the course and go in the direction of where they really want to go?
I think that the first question I would ask is this what you want? Are you doing this because this is what you want to build and live in? Or are you doing this because you think you should? Or because somebody else told you that you should? You get to decide. And if this is what you want, that's great. Then let's increase our clarity around this. Clarity is kindness, Bref, and it's kindness with other people, but it's most often and most importantly, kindness with yourself. You've got to be clear about exactly what you want to build and why. Once you do that, then it's simply a matter of moving from where you are and building a bridge from there to where you want to be. That's the easy part. getting to clarity on where you are and where you want to be. I find that to be a much more difficult exercise. This is what I walk clients through, trying to help them dial in that clarity and make sure that they're not building this because someone told them they should, or even that someone told them that they could. That doesn't necessarily mean that's the right path for you. You get to decide this. Now, if it is in scaling and growth to that level is something that you want to do to 7 to 8 and beyond, great. Let's talk about that. Let's build that strategy, and then let's build an execution plan so that you can do this in a healthy and sustainable pace. Again, I'm going to bring that up because I think that's important. Too many people are chasing success, but they haven't defined what that means. And when you don't define it, when you don't have clarity, you're just going to run harder and faster. And burnout is right around that corner. I think there's a better way. You get to choose here.
I love that. And I think there's so much gold there for our listeners, for our viewers as well. A lot of the time it comes down to just that, is the thing that gets overlooked. Having that clarity, writing down that plan, understanding who you are, removing some of those comparisons that can happen in social media and in business, looking at what your friends are doing, etc. And I know that from working with a number of different clients here at our company, Clinic Grower, that there's so many different sizes of business. There's the business owners, different ambitions, different goals. And sometimes, again, they're getting caught up in that rat race, and what they started isn't kind of where they are. And there needs to be sometimes that course correcting and hiring the right people to help them move forward in their journey so that they're not, stuck in that wheel. And that leads me to my next question, which I was going to ask, which is, you've worked with helped thousands of entrepreneurs over your career. What separates the top leaders from the rest, in your opinion?
The first thing I would say is a teachable spirit. I think a teachable spirit makes the difference. If you don't have that, then you walk into the room thinking you already know the answers. The best leaders I know walk into the room with more questions than statements. They walk in a learning posture because they know that you can learn from anybody, Bref. Yeah. Sometimes you learn what not to do, but that can be incredibly valuable. You can learn from anybody if you're in a learning posture. The best leaders I know are there consistently. That is key. The second thing is, not only are they in that posture, but they have built habits and rhythms around learning and growth. Whether it's a coach that they work with, whether it's the books that they read, the podcasts that they listen to, whatever it is, the conferences that they attend, whatever it is, they have built a rhythm where they are learning and being exposed to new ideas, being exposed to questions that force them to think outside of their own heads. What that does is, if you are intentional about your growth over time, that compounds. And this is what I see in great leaders. They understand that you never stop learning, because the minute you stop learning, you stop leading.
That's worth repeating there. When you stop learning, you stop leading. I think that's powerful, because life essentially is that lifelong learning, and that's part of our core values here at Clinic Grower as well. When it comes to that, you're learning, you're leading. Most of our clientele or business owners listening will have, at least a couple of people on their team or established a team. And one thing that we spoke about recently as well was related to this, which was, you grow a team and sometimes you hit that plateau. And as a business owner, you might suspect, well, geez, I'm just not sure now if everybody's the right people, if I have the right people on the bus. And, there's kind of that awkward aspect to it. We hear from a lot of our clientele where some of the business owners don't really know what's happening behind the scenes. And what I was getting to is, there can be tough conversations. And again, from a clinician standpoint, or even somebody who's just organically growing a business, having those tough conversations around performance is something that I know a lot of our listeners can benefit from. We use a tool, a job performance scorecard, for example, so that we can share with our clientele, how to measure KPIs. But I'd love to hear from you, because we spoke about it recently, as far as, how do you have that conversation then around what's good from a performance standpoint, what isn't, so that the time comes to reward, that it's very clear that they're overachieving, or in the case of, hey, there's underperformance, how those types of conversations can be natural and appreciated on both sides.
That's such a great question. And I think this is important for everybody listening, no matter what you're leading. We would love, as leaders, for the journey that we're on simply to be a straight line up and to the right. The reality is, nobody's journey looks like that. You may think so by looking at their highlight reel online, but the reality is everybody's journey is like this. It's a jagged line. There's up and down. There's hills and valleys. When it comes to the difficult conversations that are a part of that, and they are a part of that, the thing that I would really encourage your listeners to remember is that walking toward difficult conversations is what leaders do. We don't ignore them, and we certainly don't think they're going to get better by themselves. A friend of mine is fond of saying that bad news is not like a fine wine. It does not get better with age. That is true with the difficult conversations as well. The reality is leaders, real catalytic leaders, walk toward the messes. We walk toward the difficult conversations. It's not going to get better by itself. It's only going to get worse. So if I know that, then my responsibility is to take a step toward it. I'm now going to engage with that team member. Now, if from my perspective, they're not meeting expectations, the first question I've got to ask as the leader is, have my expectations been clearly communicated? You talk about a scorecard. That's critical. If you don't have a scorecard for every role on your team, down to and including the front desk, you need one. You need one yesterday because you've got to clearly identify what a win is. They have to know what a win is, and they have to align that information and knowledge with what you believe a win is as the owner. It has to be the same. There's no daylight between you. Once you have that clarity now you can measure it. Now you can say, hey, this is the expectation for this role. This is what a win is. Okay. This is the level of performance. Your performance, looking at the metrics that we've established, the KPIs, your performance is here. I've established what the expectation is. I've established what your performance is, not subjectively, not just how I'm feeling that day, but based on the data. Mm-hmm. Here's the expectation. Here's your performance. There's a gap here. I come to that team member and I'm like, hey, let's talk about this. Here's the expectation. Here's your performance. There's a gap. How do you propose to close the gap? Now, what have I done? I have now put the impetus on solving this problem, this performance problem, on them. I have given them the opportunity to drive the bus here. I want them to be responsible and own their own performance improvement. If I walk in and say, hey, your performance stinks, get it together or get on the bus and get out. What have I done? I'm telling them what to do. I'm owning their performance. But I haven't been clear and I haven't given them the tools necessary to know, hey, okay, what exactly am I aiming at? How do I know when I've achieved it? And how do I know if I haven't? I've got to do that as the leader. If you have not dialed this in with incredible specificity, I'm going to challenge you to do that. I'm going to challenge you to dial this in such a way that there is no room for misunderstanding. People, Dr. Brene Brown in Texas says this. She says, people fill in stories in their heads. If they don't have clarity, if we don't have full understanding, people will make up stories in their heads to answer questions. You do not want that with your team members. You do not want them making up stories on what a win is, because that probably is not going to align with yours as the owner. How do you solve it? Over communication. Defining what a win is for each position, defining what the center of the bullseye is. What does it mean for this person to knock it out of the park doing what they do? You get to define that. Make sure you over communicate it and then you measure it. And then the difficult conversations, they're a whole lot easier.
Yep, absolutely. I love it. That's just a great, tremendous practical example. I think, anybody listening or watching can use this week. And your book, Catalytic Leadership, is really full of those practical examples and supporting stories and tools of how to apply these principles in life and in business. As our audience gets about their week when they're listening to this or watching it, is there any one particular tool or an example from your book that you would like to share in order to help them operate their business and to lead their business to new levels going into the second half of this year?
What I would love to share, Bref, is that you are the hardest person you will ever lead. You may think your team members don't get it, that their performance is not great right now. But I want you to understand you are far harder to lead than they are. You get to decide how you're going to lead yourself first. And then they are going to follow how you lead. It starts with you. So my challenge to your listeners is, how are you leading yourself right now? How are you leading yourself? If your team members behaved like you do, if they followed your example, your habits, your rhythms, your pattern, would you be happy about that as their team leader? That's a great question. Another one, what's it like to be on the other side of me? as the leader? What's it like to be on the other side of me? That's an incredibly dangerous question to ask, especially if you actually ask your team members. If you've built a culture where the last 10% of honesty is something they're comfortable and willing to share, and you ask them that, get ready, because not everything you hear may make your socks roll up and down. Mm-hmm. Some things may, ooh, ow, ooh. Our job as leaders is to see feedback as a gift. Doesn't mean it's all true. Doesn't mean it's all actionable, but all feedback is a gift because somebody's willing to share it. We have to receive it that way. It starts with how you lead. It starts with leading yourself. Mm-hmm. And I would challenge your listeners, wherever they are in building their businesses and building their practices, your business, your practice, your clinic will never grow beyond your level of leadership. You will become the lid if you are not in a perpetual and consistent growth mode with your own leadership. I'm going to challenge your listeners to take a step toward that today.
That's absolutely awesome. Is there any particular mechanism that you see, just a feedback mechanism, whether it's a team of 3 or 4 or 5 or a team of 50, how to do that, how to go about asking, getting that feedback, whether it's a tool, a form, a meeting cadence, how to make it not only safe, but expected to get that last 10% from every team member in an environment of growth.
Part of it is the culture that you set as the leader. Culture is one of the things as a business owner you cannot delegate. Culture is yours. You decide what the culture is going to be. And as a guest on the podcast I host said a few months ago, and I love this, he said, culture is not the words on the wall. Culture is what happens down the hall.
I love that.
You decide, right? You choose what the culture is going to be. You either have a culture you chose intentionally and that you protect relentlessly, or you have a culture you didn't mean to have. You get to choose. When it comes to leading your team, all of this comes out of the culture that you decide you want in this business. The rhythm that I have is I meet with my direct reports every week. Those one-on-ones, that's a bit of a time suck, to be sure. And I know some of your listeners may be like, I don't have time for that. Well, let me tell you, I don't have time not to do it, because it's in those meetings that I'm listening and asking questions, and I learn things I wouldn't learn any other way. I get a heads up on problems before they become bigger problems. It saves me far more time than it costs me, because I'm able to build relationships and listen, not just tell them what to do, but listen and help them learn to think the way we think around here. Learning how to delegate not just tasks and responsibility, but helping them learn how to receive and then to delegate authority. That's how you scale. That's how you grow beyond something that is limited by you.
Absolutely beautiful. Really, what you're talking about there is, as a leader of an organization, one of the things that inevitably we have to do to grow our business and to really create that impact that I think most of us starting businesses want to do is foster and creating your own leaders internally, which you just articulated beautifully there. And thank you for that. You spoke about choices. Obviously, you've evolved a career in leading and coaching other companies to lead their businesses, to create leaders. If you weren't doing what you're doing right now, what do you think you would be doing?
Oh my goodness. What a great question. Oh, wow. I love what I do, Bref. I do. It's a joy to help other people kind of get out of their own way, to help them get out of their own heads, and to achieve the goals and dreams that they have, but have felt stuck and unable to get to. I love that. I often say when my clients win, I win. That's when I win.
Yeah.
When they win.
Yeah.
I don't know. There are many things that I enjoy doing, but this one's going to be on top of the pile. I love to write. I love to study and learn. And all those are a part of the rhythm that I've built in my own life and my own practice. But wow, what would I be doing if I didn't do this? I don't know. That's such a great question. I love it too much.
But I know that this is kind of part of, as far as the, when we're speaking with guests on the show, it's always interesting to ask that question. For you specifically, there's so many applications to leadership that you're essentially, I think there's no other way. Like, you're not in a plumber or an electrician, but you're truly coaching leadership, which is, it's a fundamental skill, and it's essential in all aspects of business. I do have a couple of fun questions for you, though, when it comes to our rapid fire round.
Yeah.
And you just mentioned reading, and I love catching up with you on books. We kind of nerd out a little bit every time we meet and we talk about what I don't necessarily read the 4 books a week that you do, but I get through my healthy share. What's one book that you believe that every entrepreneur should read?
It's probably the book I've given away more than just about any other. I buy these just to give away. It's called Soundtracks. It's by a guy named John Acuff. And what it's about is the key insight of the book is that, every one of us has a running soundtrack in our heads, just like the soundtrack of a movie. You can't imagine Star Wars without the Star Wars score, or Superman without the Superman score, right? The music is just so integral to the movie and how we perceive it. Well, you have a soundtrack too. And that soundtrack is your repetitive thoughts, the thoughts that you have consistently and over again. Most of us are living lives with broken soundtracks, with unhealthy repetitive thoughts, things that we say to ourselves we would never say to somebody else, but we say it to ourselves. And those soundtracks are affecting our performance and affecting how we lead and affecting how we operate our businesses and our practices. What Soundtracks does is it helps you understand not only how to identify the broken soundtracks, but how to replace them. One of my favorites.
Awesome. Wow, that's really good. We'll put that in the show notes as well. I'll have to check it out too. You've been holding at me with that one. Maybe we spoke about it before, but there's so many books that we spoke about. What would you say is if you had to think about one, perhaps a leadership mistake that you ever made, or can you think of anything where like, oh gosh, I wouldn't do that again?
I don't think we have time for that list. That's a very long list. So many of the things that I talk about come out of mistakes that I made, ditches that I've driven into. One is hiring. I talk a lot about hiring now because I have made some humdinger of hiring mistakes. I mean, I can think of so many times that I made a hire out of desperation or out of need. I just need a warm body in that role. No, you don't. That's the absolute worst thing you need. You do not need a warm body in that role. You need the right body in that role. And that gave rise to something I say all the time about this. Better nobody than the wrong body. That came out of my own mistakes because I was so focused on getting anybody that I got the wrong body. And a wrong hire costs you, not just financially, though significantly financially, but it costs you momentum. It costs you margin as a leader. It's an incredibly impactful. So that's a really big one. Again, better nobody than the wrong body.
Yeah, that's powerful. I think all of us who listen to this can resonate with that. And it really comes down to that, you got to take the time to find the right people. And it can be challenging in a world where, as you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of churn. But I think a lot of the things that we covered a little bit earlier, there's so many tools that you just shared, and certainly in your book, in Catalytic Leadership, just talking about that hiring process, how to do it intentionally, how to create that scorecard, how to have those conversations, and how to do things the right way. William, I'd love to know, when it comes to getting fired up and maybe thinking about some challenges that have to be overcome, is there any particular quotes or a mantra that's been helpful for you that you might like to share with the audience?
One of my favorite quotes. I've got two. I'll share. Peter Drucker was considered to be the father of modern management. Mm-hmm. Long before we started talking about leadership as a discipline, management was the thing, the topic du jour. And Drucker was the master of writing about this. One of my favorite Peter Drucker quotes is, "In God we trust, all others bring data." And I love that because it really focuses around the idea that we may be very trusting individuals. I tend to trust people, but data tells the story. And I think as leaders, we have to focus on the story that the data is telling. And we have to make sure we are measuring the right things to get the right data so that we can read the right story. That's one. The second one is a quote from Andy Stanley that I love. "Direction, not intention, determines your destination." I live outside DC, and I can get on I-95 headed north and have all the intention in the world of going to Florida. But if I get on I-95 headed north, my direction determines my destination. Intention has nothing to do with it.
That's powerful. That's powerful. And by the way, great reference to Peter Drucker. A lot of folks here might not know about him, but went to college to study marketing, and that was one that I've got a bunch of books from him, and that's awesome to hear that reference there. William, as we start to kind of wrap it up, and someone's going to be jogging, listening to this, or they're watching the show, what's one final piece of advice that you might like to give some of the aesthetic entrepreneurs that are listening, a core piece of advice that could perhaps help them on their way over the next couple of weeks?
You are helping people. You are serving them every single day. You're helping them achieve goals. You're helping them overcome obstacles and challenges. And that is incredibly rewarding. And I know that for you, that's why you started your practice. You started this so that you could serve people, so that you could help them. What I want you to hear and understand is that you are constantly pouring out. You're constantly pouring out with your clients, your patients. You're constantly pouring out with your team. You cannot pour out of an empty pitcher. I want to make sure that you understand that investing in your own growth and development is not a nice to have. It's not an optional add-on. This is something that I'm going to challenge you to prioritize, to be intentional about, because you can't give away what you don't have. And if you are constantly pouring out to other people, your team, your patients, your clients, that's great. But eventually you're going to run dry. And that's when burnout comes. I want something better for you than that. So I'm going to challenge you to make the choice, make the decision. I'm going to invest in my own growth, my own development. And I'm going to build rhythms and habits into my life. The books I read, the podcasts I listen to or watch, the conferences I attend, the coaches I hire, I'm going to build those things into my life so that I can continue pouring out and serving other people.
Absolutely fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. I think that's certainly one thing that we quickly overlook, right? If the, if that plane's coming down, you got to grab your own airbag before anybody else's, and to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves as business owners, that we're investing in ourselves, because otherwise, how can we lead people? How can we lead teams? How can we help our patients to the best of our ability? I think that's something that everybody has to hear, maybe not just once, but maybe closer to 7 times or 8 times, like you mentioned earlier.
Absolutely.
William, thanks so much for spending the time today and for really helping our listeners, our audience, and by sharing the tools and the strategies. For anybody who's listening or watching the show, where was the best place that they could go to learn more about you, perhaps to learn more about what you do and to get access to some of the tools that you provide to businesses and entrepreneurs across the world?
No, you can go to catalyticleadership.net and find out about all the things that we're involved in, the books that we write, the community that we host, an online membership community, the coaching that I do for individuals and for teams, the workshops and offsites, everything is there. And the podcast that I host where I interview amazing and astounding leaders like you, Bref.
I appreciate that. And, absolutely. So for anybody who might miss that, catalyticleadership.net, highly recommend you check it out. The podcast is tremendous. William, it's incredible how many guests that you have on there consistently, the quality of that show. I highly recommend it to all of our listeners as well. And William, thanks again, man. So incredible to have you on the show. I'm really honored that you were able to join today and to share your experience and your insights with our listeners. I'm certain it's going to be extremely helpful to anybody who's listening. And if it is, feel free to leave a comment and get in touch with William and his team over catalyticleadership.net as well. Thanks so much, William.
Thank you, Bref.
This is the Aesthetics Growth Podcast.